story and the Schiphol fire, you will see later on that some things are similar and some things are fortunately different. But it is a clear connection. Actually, I've been wondering about forensic architecture for a while because I had a feeling that the work we are doing following the Schiphol fire is maybe in need of some of the skills and potential that forensic architecture has to offer. But when I noticed the title of this series, I saw the term forensic justice. And forensic justice goes beyond, in my view, forensic architecture. So let me ask you a question. Who of you does remember the Schiphol fire, 2005? So not everybody. So I will introduce a bit of the context of the Schiphol fire using some video that was produced by the investigation team that was installed after the fire. And then we'll go into the different ways that survivors, relatives, activists like myself have been trying to follow the, let's say, the wisdom of the words of Papa Sacco. We are here to make a life again. And I will try to make you understand how this term, to make a life again, equals justice. And I think the term that we can apply here is restorative justice. Restorative justice is not about punishing the guilty, but about repairing the damage. So we will see how, in the case of the Schiphol fire, this has been attempted in various ways. I think it's only fair to introduce Mustafa as well. You're one of the survivors. You live in Amsterdam. You're alive. You've seen your family again. I'm not sure if we can call you a happy man, but I'm sure that I can call you the man with the memory. You remember all the details of the fire and what happened after. Can you give us one of these details? And you can do it in Dutch and I'll translate for you, all right?
Ja, is goed. Ja, ik heb in memory. I was sleeping. And then I wake up because there was too much rock inside. Smoke was too much smoke inside my room, and I think if I am dreaming of, is it true? And then I start to call the guardians, but nobody answers. And how more I call the guardians and I move in myself to go out, how more I instinct I can suffocate, and then I was quickly rocklos. Bewusteloos, unconscious, and after I see myself, after I don't know how much, 5 minutes or 4 minutes, I see myself to Koninklijke Marechaussee with a gas mask in hun fiets. They take me out to recreation place. In this moment, this happened quickly, but I think maybe I am dead. This need human being faces. And after when I was in the recreation place, and I start to adem, then I remember and I think, yeah, that is true, what happened.
So you breathe. Thank you. Papa Sacco, let me ask you why people, Schiphol people especially, call you Papa Sacco.
Yeah, thank you. They call me Papa Sako. I'm the more older inside the group. And when they get trauma, I help them to be down. That's why finally they call me Papa Sako. After the fire, they're fighting a lot. And I make control to them. That's why finally they call me Papa Sako. Yeah. I feel so sad and guilty when I remember I changed my cell to one young boy, 30 years old, and he's died. He didn't ask me to change it, but he was happy and listened music to his cell, and I come to him and tell him, can we change cell? And we changed, and the same day, the fire happened and he's died. And when the fire happened, we tried to help them, but the security, they make us gone. Nobody move. And I think when they let us, we can do something too. They don't want to go inside to help the slachtoffer. That's why 11 people are died. Yeah.
I promised to give you some context about the fire. And I will read from a kind of summary that I wrote a couple of years ago. Some fragments, not all. Holland is an interesting example of a Western European country that struggles with migration. Holland is one of the richest countries in the world with a stable democracy and a good reputation in human rights. It also has a colonial past and a traumatic period of the Second World War and the Holocaust. Since some years now, Holland is going through political turmoil caused by populist politicians that feed on widespread xenophobia and especially Islamophobia. The prime target of these politicians, and to a certain extent also of the mainstream parties, are migrants. Immigration is more than a management problem. It brings to the surface the historical and political identity complex of this small country that cherishes the metaphor of the polder. The way Holland deals with immigrants today reflects the confusion that is reigning in times of globalization, of European disintegration, and cultural imagination. Migration has the potential of undermining a society. That's the fear of the politicians. Mr. Wim Kok, who used to be a prime minister, he was one of the first to point out that irregular migrants threaten the arrangements of the Dutch welfare state. On the other hand, I believe that migrants can also change a receiving society's understanding of the world and the place it occupies in it. And often a shocking event is needed as a catalyst to provoke reflection and change. The Schiphol fire of 2005 was such an incident. It was a disastrous climax of Dutch migration politics. It was the result of a pragmatic attempt to solve the paradox. On the one hand, dealing with humans who are not supposed to be here at all, and at the same time, they are here. So how can you deal in a decent way with somebody you deny whose existence you deny? That's the paradox. So, if we go now to the way after the fire, the government, the state, if you like, the institutions, looks back, reflected on the fire, we will see an image of the animation that was produced as parallel products of the investigation report that you can read online. And I'll just read with you in English what they have to say. You can start the first video now, please. Okay. So, in this introduction, the Dutch Safety Board tells us that on the night of the 26th of October 2005 and in the early morning of 27th of October 2005, 11 people lost their lives in a major fire at the detention center Schiphol-Oost. The guards were not able to free these people from their cells. However, they did succeed in opening 21 of the 26 cells, thus rescuing 32 occupants from their cells. The translation is not mine, it's theirs. A total of 15 people suffered injury, including guards and cell occupants, and one wing of the building was destroyed. Following the fire, accommodation was found at other locations for the majority of the 298 occupants of the detention center. A great many of these have petitioned for psychosocial counseling. The following questions formed the foundation for the Safety Board's investigation. How could 11 cell occupants die during the fire? And second, which arrangements were made for the relief and aftercare of the other people involved in the occurrence? In asking these questions, the Safety Board has restricted itself to the circumstances that contributed to this fire's fatal turn of events and the consequences that the fire has had on those directly involved. So, the restriction is an important term here, because they restrict themselves, in my view, to the technical explanations, and the management lacks the failures of the management in the Ministry of Justice that made it possible for the fire to happen. But I believe that some of the most important questions are not asked and even less answered by the Security Council, the Safety Board, sorry. Because the first question is, of course, why were these people there in the first place? Why do you put people in prison who are not suspected of any criminal or of any crime? They're just there to be deported. Just like a post package that goes returned to sender. Like a box of banana that has gone the wrong way. That's why one of our slogans was, "We are not bananas." People may get bananas when they are treated for reasons that nobody can explain and nobody will understand. Why am I here? We've heard a little bit about the feelings of the people who were inside. And we will share later on, in a way, the feelings of the people who still remember at the commemoration, because that is one of the ways we still testify every year. But I prefer to read the introduction of one of the survivors who managed to make this book, Alarm Bells. It's in Dutch, but it's the best book on the fire. Just his introduction says, "The military policeman barks his words in my face. 'You step back or I will shoot you through the head.' Before I realize it, I am looking in the barrel of a shotgun. The eyes of the man are sharp, and I freeze of fear. Many of us have been released on time from our cells, but we are not complete yet. I hear the shouting and the howling of the people who are stuck inside. I hear the bonking of their powerless fists on the cell doors. I have to go back. No man must die in here. All of a sudden, the woman from Ukraine comes to my mind. I think back to last Wednesday. I saw her then in the recreation room, in tears, taking leave from her husband. That image grabs me at my throat. She is stuck in there. But this woman has to come out. I don't want her to die. It cannot happen. I want to go to her. The woman in cell 14, we must save her, I shout to the others. But I don't get a chance. Before I know, a weapon is pulled and pointed at me. Within half an hour, I'm looking death in the eyes twice. I fled out of a burning cell, and now I'm about to be shot dead, only because I want to save somebody's life." What strikes me, and what is also what Mustafa just said, the memory is always in relation to somebody. The strongest feeling comes when you're connected with somebody, with your cellmate, with the man you changed your cell with, or in this case, the woman you met a day before and you know she's dying. This is the human face of the tragedy. And I contrast this with the way the Safety Board investigated. because they don't put the essential questions. Why are people detained? Why could it happen? It is not only because all the things that could go wrong went wrong, the safety measures were not followed. Sometimes there were not even safety measures. They never exercised. All these things are listed that made the fire possible. They didn't answer the question, what started the fire? So it took them 6 years to decide that nobody knows. And they pointed out the regulations that were not followed, that were not clear, and they gave recommendations. More security, more control, right? So I believe what we try to do as Migrant to Migrants, as a kind of platform for people who have this experience and who share this experience, and there are many, we'll go into that later. I think it started with meeting each other. When I met the brothers, something happened that triggered something. And I believe everybody has that capacity. This maybe can be a beginning of restoration, building new relations, meeting new people, finding another light. So if we look at the activities that we deployed over the years and we put that in the perspective of restorative justice, I think we could can give you a few examples that may be helpful. One of the boys who died, his name was Robert Ara. He was from Suriname, so he was almost as Dutch as me, but he had the wrong papers. His mother lives in Holland, in Almere. And I'm afraid she's the only mother of the people who died, who lives in Holland, because most of them don't live in Holland. So she became the mother. If Papa Sacco is the papa, Gladys Tukaya was the mother. And she insisted on having the chance to perform her ceremony to bring peace to her son's soul. When we met and we talked about this, we decided to write a letter to the Minister of Justice to ask him permission to let Gladys and her husband go into the cell to see and face the place where her son died. The Minister of Justice, who had replaced the minister who was before the minister, Minister Donner, who had to resign after the fire, after the publication of the safety board, concluding that people could have been saved if they had followed the rules. So this new minister, he accepted, and he let Gladys Tukaya do her ceremony, which is an Indian ceremony from Suriname. So this was, in a sense, a beginning of what could have been restorative justice from the side of the state, because you need two people to tango. However, this was not followed up. Although I can say that the government did put a monument, a stone, at the place where it happened. But we did too, and they were separate lines. I remember one of the people, when you ask, what do you need to get over this? What is, for you, the essence of your trauma? It's again about a relation. Chirac, he told me, if only they could say sorry, that would be helpful. They never did. Another example of restorative justice is the book I just mentioned. He got it out of his system. He told his story, and a good journalist wrote it all down. And it's an amazing story, not only about the fire, but about a life. It's in Dutch. You can order it at bol.com. I think another example, and maybe the most visual example of trying to make a life again, trying to find justice or create a new life by doing justice to us being human, is the commemoration. That's really the heart of the whole campaign. Although I would say the political aim of my activities with the Schiphol fire is, of course, to abolish detention of illegalized migrants. But the form it took and the way it happened in the connections that we made was the commemoration. Every year there's a commemoration where sometimes 10, sometimes 20, but in the beginning 300 people showed up in this remote area east side of Schiphol Airport where nobody ever comes. There's a little monument between some bushes, and if you know it, you can go there and see the 11 pillars that represent the 11 dead. You will see it later on. But before I do, I'd like to go back to 2008 and mention another example of what we tried. And that's in 2008, another commemoration that was actually produced in the Blue House. The Blue House, which was an art project of Jeanne van Heeswijk, who will be having an exposition or a full program even next year in this place. Her project was called the Blue House, and she offered hospitality as an artist in residence to Papa Sacco, so he was the first that could be doing a step towards normal life after having spent more than a year still in detention. They were not allowed to move freely. They were even threatened to be deported after all. It took a year before they realized we cannot do this. They need at least some rest and security to be able to cope with their traumas and maybe get some treatment that works. So that's where we worked on the broadcast as a platform for migrants, for people in Eiberg who were pioneers who came to live there new. So we tried to find a middle ground, a kind of communication between, hey, who is moving and where are we going and where are we from and what is the common ground here? Working with artists that were brought by Jeanne van Heeswijk to do investigations in the neighborhood. So we tried to, if you like, infiltrate, to make this place a place where normal life is possible, where people can meet normal people without the stigma, without maybe even the trauma, to make something new. And one of the things, of course, was that we made the commemoration, and we made a tree that was kind of symbol for the monument that we wanted to erect. A solid, durable, strong monument. We didn't have the means nor the permission to erect a monument at the place, but we started up. We built a tree of aluminium and we decorated them, and everybody participated. It was a big noise, aluminium pipes and stuff. I would like to show the pictures, but that will come another day. You can see it here, for instance. Because it was pretty solid because we put the cement in the ground, which dries quickly, so it was really solid. And then the mayor had a problem, because we had erected there a monument for the dead of the Schiphol fire, which was not allowed, and which he could not allow, so he forced us to move it out. Sacco almost broke his back with a sledgehammer breaking the cement. This was the foundation of this tree, and we moved it, we walked it along the road to the canal and back to some place in Amsterdam. As a kind of, as a proposal for a permanent monument, which later on was realized. So in that sense it worked. We stated that this tree, this proposal, was the cultural expression of the migrant as a world citizen, the moving tree. It reflects the paradox of the migrant. It lacks roots, but it has branches and falling leaves. It is a mobile artifact, fragile and flexible, that may miraculously appear anywhere in the world. And quite similar, the radio station that was mentioned already by Nick, that we started in the Blue House with a weekly meal and a round table, and we had people passing by and having discussions in many languages and making phone calls all over the place. M2M Radio is as well a vehicle for the survivors of the fire to chat, to meet, because they were spread all over the planet actually. But it also tries to show an alternative approach to the fact of migration. As an environment of free communication, it produces connections between migrants, activists, artists, researchers, etc. And that's what we still do. M2M tries to enable migrants to communicate better among each other and with society. M2M wants to learn and wants to teach. It discovers and explores ways to restore trust. First of all, in yourself, self-confidence. And it practices the idea that there is no need for borders between us. Let's go to video number 2 and see the last commemoration. That was exactly 20 days ago. And I will find just a second. This is where Sacco and me are present, representing the survivors. And you see Sacco here, coming to the fore, talking to the people present from the surrounding villages.
He didn't mind to be deported and see his family again. No problem. But before they could deport him, they nearly burned him. Sacco is a survivor. Sacco says, we are here to make a life again, together as one. These words are still very important for me and also for the undocumented migrants, the illegalized migrants who are fighting for their normal life. They also say, wij zijn hier. We are here. We are here is to make a life again, finally, to make a normal life. And we can make that happen, because nobody else does. From the politicians, we cannot expect that they give equal rights to people who are humans like you and me. Why are you here, Sacco?
Yeah, first I say thank you to everybody are here. I'm the only one to come here. Yeah, but the guys are here. But I never let them die. That's why I say we are here to make life again. Here, in this place. We make them life again. But they'll never come back. I tell you, thank you very much. Thank you forever. Even I'm dying, I want you to continue to do that. Thank you.
Jingle. Okay, we are now trying to play you.
My name is Mohammed Umar Sheikh. I'm from Somalia. I'm here 1 year now. They say they don't take me back. Somalia problem, fight, everything. They keep me here for nothing. Solidarité avec les Somaliens.
Radio Migrant to Migrant.
Now, this was actually a recording from one of the commemorations where we communicated with the inmates who were then able to shout to us from the recreation ground. And we had communication, we had even conversation. Sacco, I have to ask you something that I never asked you before. Because at the first commemoration, you said these words. Even before the commemoration, you said these words. We are here. How did you come to use those words?
Thank you. We was there where the fire happened to commemorate the dead people. That's why I say we are here to make life again. We never bring them back, but we have to remember these young people who are dying in the fire. I don't imagine how they are dying in the fire. That's why I say we are here to make life again. But to bring them back is not possible. But we can, every year, to remember them, to make the memorial. That's why I say we are here to make life again.
Mustafa, what does that mean to you, to make a life again? And what do you need? If you look back, what did you need after the fires to make a life again?
Yeah, what I need to make a life again after the fire, that's justice, first place. And justice for the 11 brothers, the are died in this prison. Justice for those who his dies, and take care for families from the victims, and justice to provide for trauma care, because we take too much care from specialists right now, but to benefit, to profit from this trauma care, justice have been done. And right now, we don't know who is responsible for this fire, because one suspect, Ahmed Isa, he's after he get his freedom, and we know that the fire is happening because technical kortsluiting, and but I know that it's difficult.
It's another technical detail. What caused the fire? I mentioned that the safety board never found out. And in the court cases against the one suspect, who was actually the first victim of the fire, the guy who was in the cell that started to burn. In all the investigations in court, nobody knows for sure how the fire was started. But he was accused of starting the fire because he threw away his shekkie before he fell asleep. Now, we know that he rolls his cigarettes with blue Rizla. In those days, there was a blue Rizla, which is different from the blue Rizla that you see today. And every smoker knows that if you roll a cigarette with a Rizla blue and you leave it for 20 seconds without puffing, it dies. So everybody who has common sense and some daily knowledge knew that he couldn't have started the fire in that way. But they needed a scapegoat. They needed, and I think the right term is torture. They put him in isolation. They interrogated him when he was still under coma or under heavy sedation. He was for more than a half year in isolation. And even after he was released, because he had done time, they didn't let him go. No, they deported him after all back to Libya. So that's what justice did. And like Mustafa knows better than I do, because he was the one that pushed until the end to bring the real responsible people to justice. If not the minister himself, then the directors of the dienst justitiële inrichtingen, the prison officials. But they were not even accused, they didn't stand trial. That's one side of the justice. And the other side is what you mentioned, the care. And in your case, that's one of the questions that is half answered by the safety board, that it requires more organization, to provide this kind of care. Was it hard to get some good treatment after the fire, Sako, for you as well?
Yeah, my problem, I still suffering to now. 18 years now, I don't see my wife, I don't see my children. When I let them there, they were so young, like 10 years of, minder than 10 years. Now they are big boy. The girls, they are big, like you guys. And I don't see them to now. Yeah. They don't give me good treatment. Am I still suffering to think about my family, my wife, my children, and I'm still here in Holland without any hope.
I'd like to kind of round up with 2 points. Speaking as a media activist, I personally feel the need to create a kind of monument that is more than the stones and the wooden pillars that are hard to find right now. In a way, this presentation is part of a continuous production of testification, of testifying, of making people feel, see, face, understand the reality that is happening even till today. Undocumented migrants are still in prison, and I know them personally. We have telephone contact, and we will campaign to get them out as long as we can, because this is still going on. But as a, if you like, an artist or a media producer, one of the projects that are still pending is to make a documentary. A series actually of 11 documentaries that represent the 11 young people who died. And in these 11 short documentaries that together might become a full-blown documentary, we asked the simple question, who was Maribel? Who was Taras? Who was Robert, Oksana, Naiva, George, Kemal, Ava, Lutfi? All those names. But more than names, we don't know. So we will ask you guys, but also the guards, what do you know about? We want to give these people a face, to make them alive, in a sense. That is the monument that could happen. So a range of persons that are related with the Schiphol fire will appear on camera and answer one question, which will then evolve in a Socratic interview, a confrontation, or even silence. We will ask, what do you remember of those 11 who died that night in the Schiphol fire? And through these testimonies, we hope to give the dead a face, to restore their dignity, while being well aware that these 11 are representative of a large global family of destitute, illegalized migrants ending up in administrative detention, ready for deportation. And then these faces may become mirrors. Mirrors, and we ask how, as makers, as public, as a citizen or as a survivor, how we can relate to people who were not treated as human beings, but rather as parcels to be returned to sender. And how do we relate with a system that produces all this denial? We call it democracy, don't we? And to finish, I'd like to just mention that, in my view, part of the restorative justice is what illegalized migrants have done themselves in the last 6 years by organizing themselves, by doing demonstrations, by organizing tent camps, by occupying houses in Amsterdam, by going on the street, by taking part in theater, by having football teams, infiltrating society, being undocumented under the name of We Are Here. We Are Here is a messy network of volunteers and artists and activists and retired people like myself almost, but mainly illegalized young migrants, mainly from Africa, who are stuck because they have to go, but they cannot go, and they can go nowhere else. That's the other side of the picture that becomes visible. That's the power of representation that We Are Here presents. We are here, the words of Papa Sacco, to make a life again, together as one. Thank you.
Thank you.